Right, I'm with this gentleman whose name is
I'm John Baker.
a famous political figure in Jersey. Almost.
Almost. Well, I call myself a political activist and campaigner, a Jersey boy who works for St Helier, because that takes up a lot of my time working for the parish of St Helier in a number of honorary roles.
You had the experience of the by-election for District 3-4 recently. There were 9 candidates for one seat. I mean, they've been discussing reforming the system in the States this week. How does that fit in with reform? I mean, what do you think of that experience? Is that logic? Is that okay? 9 candidates for one seat. Is that you experienced it? What's it like from the candidate's point of view?
Well, I suppose I could compare it with because I know Roland Hewlin quite well, and in fact, sort of helped him with his campaign in St Peter's, and there were only 2 candidates in St Peter for one seat, but that wasn't a by-election. The problem, of course, with the by-election in 3 and 4 was the fact that 3 and 4 actually has 4 deputies, but of course, because of the sad demise of Richard Rondell, there was a by-election for the one seat. And there were a lot of hopefuls, including myself, obviously, but people that had tried and not given up. I guess the argument. There's a number of arguments about this, but the first argument is perhaps that there should be a deposit system, so that if you don't get a percentage of the vote, that you put £100 or £250 or something substantial, and you might lose your deposit. That way, you may cut down the competition, because 9 candidates, I think, is pushing it. But when you look back at the previous, to put some comparisons on it, you look back at the previous election, which I think was in 2017. The senatorial election had 23 candidates for 8 seats. Now that was a bit of a bun fight, because I looked it up the other day, and for just a hustings, a 2-hour session, they were just given 90 seconds to answer 3 questions. And that really isn't enough time to put across your views. So when you get a situation, as could happen, because I'm not very excited about this reform idea, if you've only got 6 districts and you've got either 5 or 6 candidates for each seat, and you're doing away with the senators, you're doing away with the constables, then you're going to get a fair number of candidates. So I have seen some commentators suggest that you could get 20 or maybe even 30 candidates for each district, which is going to be a bit of a problem.
The even 9 candidates on one table, if you're going to have 9 candidates for one seat, it's heavy going, isn't it? How do you I mean, it doesn't really work from the electorate point of view. How can you ask them?
No, that's a difficulty. I think part of the difficulty of that is that people will not register with all of the candidates, and there's a danger that when they go to actually pass their vote, they'll look at the list and they'll end up just voting for the names that they recognise, which could either be the sitting candidate or the guy that's battered away long enough at it. This was my first try, and I have to say it was a bit of a painful experience. I didn't really appreciate that a by-election was going to be so tough.
Well, it's a big district to try and do.
Yeah.
The cost, you say about them putting up a deposit,
Yeah.
but it already cost you, to do it seriously, it cost you a fair bit of money.
I have to admit, and anybody can go down and have a look at the election
And I
expenses.
shall be.
Yeah, it cost a fair bit of money.
That's right. So that in itself is a penalty. You have to put money up and you lose it. And there's 8 candidates there, put their money up.
That's very true. But some people, to be fair, I mean, it was the first time around for me, so it was more expensive because I had to create everything, as opposed to, and I won't name names, but some candidates had previously stood for election, so they had their old posters, which they maybe put a sticker over. I know there was one particular candidate I've got in mind that put a lot of posters out there. He'd stood in a previous senatorial election and he just pasted over senator and put deputy. So there's some people didn't have to spend that amount of money because they had the ammunition.
But the contrast is, of course, as we know, 11 out of 12 constables don't have to be elected at all. And they finished out with exactly the same powers and the same salary if they're elected in the States, or they're chosen, 11 out of 12.
Yeah.
So there's something seriously wrong with the system, isn't there?
I suppose you could argue that because you've got the disparity, and everybody quotes St Mary's and St Helier. Let's put it roughly, sort of 1,500 people in St Mary's, 33,000 or people that can vote, or probably 36,000 in St Helier. So there's a huge disparity there. But the main issue with constables in or out of the states is the erosion of the parish system. Now, the parish system not only is in the blood of people like me, but it saves the government and it saves the island a lot of money, a lot of work.
Well, people like me who have have never been in the parish system, say that the parish system would be so much better if the constable was not in the States. If they really got themselves organised, they had the 12 parishes working together, meeting regularly, drawing the parish public into their meetings, and let them discuss things, and doing so much more out of the parish halls.
Okay, I can see that argument moving forward, because I'm working with some of the people in St Helier at the municipality to create a parish council for St Helier. Now, the concept of a council is moving the parish system on to something a bit more modern and, to be fair, democratic. So what I'm personally trying to do is get the groundswell, the grassroots of community groups involved at a low level with the council. So then when we build the council, it'll be a sort of pyramid, with the constable at the top and then his various committees working down to the community and more community involvement. So instead of just a parish assembly, you would have permanent contact and permanent engagement with the I won't call them ratepayers, but
it's extraordinary that even in your parish, St Helier, 30,000 population, the constable hasn't been contested there for several elections, potential elections.
Well, you could argue that we've had some pretty good constables. I personally think Simon Crowcroft is
absolutely,
excellent.
But you'd expect out of 30,000 people there'd be one person who's not happy with him and would contest it, wouldn't there?
Well, I think there's lots of people that are not happy.
Right.
I mean, the bigger your profile, the more people are going to be, anti. Certainly, Simon.
Especially if 9 would stand, as you found, for one seat for a deputy.
Yes, it is rather strange, but I think there's a completely different role. I think you either want to be a deputy or perhaps a senator, or you want to be a constable, because they are different roles. And I imagine that the people that take on the role of constable are more interested in that particular work, and perhaps the state's work is a
so
bit of
why
an
on earth does anybody want to be a senator? What's the weird difference about a senator?
I suppose, number one, it carries prestige. Number two, you're more likely to be able to say, well, I've got time to take on ministerial responsibilities and not have to worry about your parishioners. But I think you've got to experience these roles. I mean, I haven't experienced anything other than working in the honorary system below. I did try to be popular in St Helier once, but I didn't.
My constable has been a deputy, a senator, and he's now constable.
Yes.
Now, why didn't he stay as deputy? Why didn't he stay as senator? Why did he want to be? I have no idea.
I don't know. I think you need to interview him.
Well, I have interviewed him years ago.
Did he make a particularly good
the
job?
The strange thing is, he doesn't agree with constables being in the States as of right. And he thinks the States ought to be all deputies. He doesn't agree with the role of senator either.
I think it could work. I mean, there's various arguments, but I think it could work. I don't see why we need the quantity. I mean, it's a small island. Why do we need, 46, 47?
49 elected members in theory.
Yeah.
But of course, the reality is that we're trying to be an independent island.
Yeah.
And if you play that game, and if you're involved in the finance international game, you need local, national and international government all in one assembly. That's why if you farm off the parishes, the local stuff, it gives the central states a chance to do their job properly. At the moment, they're bogged down with so many things which shouldn't concern them at all. At times I've heard them discussing recycling in one form or another, one of your subjects. But it needn't be discussed at the central level. It could be, I mean, there's a central element to it, but basically the work needs to be done
at the detail needs to be done in the parishes. I'm working on that, as you know.
So, exactly. So there are elements to it. So to have a national, international government, and to try and run it with only, because you're going to be doing all the things that they're discussing in the Parliament in London, and they do that with 650, and they've been making one holy mess of it with 650. Some of the best brains in Britain.
Yeah, but look at the figures. If you look in the UK and you look at the number of candidates that stand in each district in the UK, I think the average is about 5.
Right.
So we don't get, I mean, as I say, when we move forward with this, if we get this reform as is being suggested by Russell Labby, the commentators are saying you're going to get 20 plus candidates, whereas in the UK, for much bigger districts, the average is
It's
about
not
5.
that aspect. Like today in the States, they were discussing what is the Constitution. They were trying to work out, at this late stage in the game, what does it mean to have a Constitution?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, if they don't even understand those sort of fundamentals,
I know, it's shocking.
you know, the powers that we have, what happens when we pass a law, what is the status of that law?
Yeah, yeah.
They don't even understand that.
Yeah. I mean, as you quite rightly have pointed out many times, you know, we sign up to all these international agreements and then we walk away and we do nothing. But the States is absolutely, that's the way it's always been.
Well, they've
They
signed
make
up for the
decisions-
biggest obligation ever today,
Yeah.
which
Oh, yeah.
they will simply not
Huge.
fulfill.
Huge.
There's no way, because the senator, Miss Ferguson was trying to put the fear into people.
Well,
We can't
she was
give.
striking a balance. I don't think she was trying to put fear
Well,
into
she was
people.
using they're going to destroy capitalism,
No.
and obviously that is.
Mike, I've got to
some
challenge
people
you.
have taken that.
She
theme.
did not say that. That was a commentator that applied those words. Can I just say that Sarah then stood up later in that same session,
She did modify
this morning,
about some
and
of
she
her comments.
apologised
Yeah, I
and
know.
said, "No, I'm not trying to destroy."
But that
capitalism."
is the crunch, and for this island,
Yeah.
it's on the surface, it's an international finance activity. It would be so much easier to clamp down on rampant capitalism because there's no factories here with chimneys producing anything.
Yeah.
They're not producing anything. So to close that side of it down, in theory, would be so much easier.
Yeah.
But of course, it would destroy what is the accepted economy of the island. So in order to do that, to support the world climate
Yeah.
cause, which is what has to be done, what do you do?
Well, I don't think certainly not, for instance, St Helier, you know, our proposition that was accepted at the town hall that Rob Wood put for St Helier was for St Helier to control its carbon emissions. So we're not trying to save the planet, we're just trying to save St Helier. By the same token, the agreement today was for the island. So, you know, outside of the island, the only real thing that's going to be affected is, for instance, if the states say they've got some investments with all their rainy day fund in companies that have, you know, investment in fossil fuel. So you could say, well, you know, if we've got that sort of arrangement, that's what we should be drawing back on. But really, we concentrate, you know, climate change emergency and carbon neutral must be contained in what we're doing in the
It's
island.
very much part of an international movement. Well,
It
that's
is,
the
of course,
way.
I appreciate
That's the
that.
way the campaigners want it.
Absolutely, but each district, I mean, if you look in the UK, parish councils are announcing. We've just had Scotland, we just had the UK, you know, announce a climate change emergency. But months before that, we've had districts in the UK, towns, city councils in the UK have done, prior to St Helier, have announced climate emergencies. And if you go on the web, you can look at what they're doing, and they are taking action.
Well, they keep kicking the problem around from Tokyo and then Paris. They keep kicking it around in an international sense.
Yes, but there's...
Perhaps one day they will get to grips with it.
Yes, but
Perhaps
you've
they
got-
will.
You've got so much vested interests and money, China and America, as you know, and you've got, you know, with the leaders there, and they're depending on whole industries that are the basis of the company's income, of the country's income. So, you know,
But
when
the
you've got somebody
seas-
like Trump,
the seas will continue to be full of plastic until
until-
there is an international agreement on many things. It won't just be simple, not just the use of plastics, it's the whole
well, as you know,
structure that goes with
with
it.
plastics, it's not about recycling, it's about turning off the tap. So you've got to stop using plastic for any number of things.
Very
you know, plastic
fundamental
bottles.
stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we know this is one of the problems, is you say to people, well, what can I do about it? What can Jersey do about it? Well, Jersey can solve its own little problem, in a sense,
Yeah.
but you can't turn off the electricity supply to France, as far as we know, for a very long time.
Well, we're told, you know, that's very green because the French electricity comes mostly from hydro and nuclear. So, you know, that carbon footprint's pretty small.
Yes, that's what they say.
Yeah.
But we're also told it's polluting the sea up at of Flamanville all around there. It's
Well,
dreadful
come on, there's all
pollution.
sorts of issues tied in with electricity. I don't want to go into great detail, but we're oversupplied in terms of the voltage that we're supplied into Jersey. I mean, 250 volts, when we're supposed to be, you know, most of our machinery can run on 220 volts. So that's costing us 15% more than we really need to pay, but that's the way the power companies operate.
So you stood for District 3.
And 4.
District 3 and 4.
Let's leave them out.
I never quite understood why they don't make it one district.
Well, it's
whatever
the
we are.
maintains that come together and, whatever. It's the way it is.
I mean, obviously you've got another 3 years nearly to think about it again. Do you think, is this still on the agenda? I mean, if the system is the same, as I suspect it will be in 3 or 4 years' time,
You think it's going to be the same with the constables and the senators?
I can't see who's going to change it.
No, I think they've got to come up with a better version. What do you think about the idea of perhaps 2 houses?
Well, I think the
Like an upper
constables,
house.
if the constables were farmed off and did their parishes, I think in a sort of a sense that would be a second house.
Yeah, so they could act like a second house.
They would deal with their own thing.
Yeah. So
Whether they have any communication between the two, that's
Well, I suppose
another matter.
if you move forward the idea of a parish council, which, to be fair, some of the other parishes are obviously very interested in. St Brelade are following us and involved with what we're doing, and I think possibly Sadie and St Saviour, the idea of a council could work very well, and that could take the onus, including things like planning matters, that sort of thing, away from government, and that could really thin out the detail, let the parish concentrate on what happens specifically in their parishes.
I think the most likely of the reforms would be the abolition of the senators. That's the most likely one.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really, apart from Senator Farnham, will really support that all the way.
No.
He's
There's more logic for getting rid of the senators than there is
Absolutely.
in some arguments for getting rid of the
I mean,
constables.
obviously my view is I want to get rid of the constables insofar as they're in the States, but But-
I think what you've got to do is look at an evolutionary role for the constables. Again, I've talked about the council, talked about the possibility of a second house. I think they do, when you think about somebody like Simon Crowcroft, Simon works very hard, both as a constable and, as you see, in the States Assembly. He very often stands up in the Assembly, makes some good speeches and good points and pushes the ideas and concepts for St Helier. And I think without St Helier having some sort of representation other than the deputies in St Helier, then it will be a bit difficult. So certainly, getting back to the council thing, if we are able to get the deputies more involved in parish matters, and to be fair, they are supposed to be parish deputies, then I think it could work. But I challenge you this, if we're going to make these districts, we water down the parish thing, because if you're going to stand for election in a new district that takes in 3 parishes, who are you representing? If you live in St Wands, but you're representing 3 parishes, so if you want to speak to your parish deputy, it's your district deputy, and it's not quite the same
Well,
thing.
I'm not quite sure how they will organise those elections. Can it all go through the judicial graph, and your expenses is another element? How are they going to sort out the expenses if you're going to have districts?
Yeah.
You see, I don't quite know how they're going to do that, because they
No.
won't be all the same. There are elements to the changes which will be difficult to achieve. Personally, I'd like the constituencies to be as small as possible, all deputies.
Yeah.
And I think it'll encourage a political party system. Where the parties will come from, I don't know, but
Yeah, I
I
think
think
parties
that all these changes will encourage parties. I think they will.
I think they will. I think we should encourage parties. Something I've been thinking about. Can I just ask you a question? What about something we haven't talked about in regard to this subject? Is the fact that here we are with Russell Labby and his team have come up with this whole scheme. Well, it's like the turkeys voting for Christmas.
Absolutely.
Why are they being allowed to suggest what their own future should be?
Well, of course,
it should be an independent.
They're claiming that they've
outside.
had the outside investigation by the Commonwealth Party group that came over. But of course, they weren't actually suggesting what you should do. They
No,
were
they're-
just saying,
yeah.
look, it's a pretty rotten system you've
They're
got.
picking and choosing.
But
aren't they?
lots of people have been for many years suggesting various reforms.
Yeah.
And so far, so I suppose they're saying, well, let's get the damn
Well, they're
thing
picking
going.
and choosing. They're ignoring referendums. They're ignoring the public choice. I think was it not the consensus when there was a last vote that the public of Jersey wanted to keep the constables' roles?
Well, of course, I ran the no vote. I mean, I was virtually single-handed.
Yeah.
That was it. I mean, that's how unfair the system was when it came to a referendum.
Yeah.
There was no structure then to organise a proper referendum. So we had the establishment voting yes, keep them, and me virtually saying no. Well, obviously, it's pretty obvious what the result's going to be, isn't it? If you want to fix an election, that's
Yeah.
one way to do it.
Yeah.
Put Mike Dunn up as the one person and have the establishment against him. I mean, you can.
Oh, it makes a change for Brexit.
Anything else you want to tell me? We better stop.
Okay, that's lovely. Nice to meet you, Mike, once again, and thanks for all you do.
Cheers.